You know, semantics asks some of the biggest questions out there about language. And in this breakdown, we are tackling the most fundamental one of all. How in the world do words actually get their meaning? We're going to walk through the major theories and show you exactly why the answers that seem like common sense, well, they just don't hold up.
I mean, really think about it. How does a sound I make, like tree, get connected to that big leafy thing growing outside? It seems so simple on the surface, right? But the most obvious answers fall apart the second you start to poke at them. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to dismantle those easy answers to get to a much more interesting truth.
So, the heart of the puzzle is this. What is the actual relationship between the word we say, the signifier, and the thing out there in the world, the signified? How do we possibly bridge that gap?
Okay, let's start with the idea that just feels right to most people. It's the one we all kind of assume is true. Words are just labels. They're like little sticky notes we put on everything in the world. And, it makes sense, because this is often how we see kids learning language, right? They point at a dog and say, dog. It's a naming game. So let's put this idea to the test.
All right, so let's give this idea an official name. We'll call it Theory 1, the naming theory. Think of this as our first and most obvious suspect in our investigation into what meaning really is. It's an ancient idea, but is it the right one?
The naming theory is, well, it's beautifully simple. It actually goes all the way back to Plato, and it just says that there's a direct one-to-one link between a word and an object. So the meaning of the word cow is quite simply a cow. Easy enough. But before we go any further, we've got to clear up two really crucial terms. Now, if you're studying this for an exam, you absolutely need to nail this distinction. So denotation is the relationship between a word and the entire class of things it can apply to. The word cow denotes all cows, past, present, and future. Reference, on the other hand, is what you're doing in a specific situation. When you point and say, look at that cow, you are referring to one specific member of that class. Got it? Cool. Okay, so let's really dive into this. Because while the naming theory feels intuitive, it starts to fall apart almost immediately once you look at it closely. It's like a neat little box that just can't contain the incredible messiness of real language. And here it is, the first major crack in the theory. You can point to a cow, sure, but can you point to running? Or attractive? Or how about a word like traditional? The whole theory seems like it was built exclusively for physical objects you can point at.
This is a huge problem. I mean, even traditional grammar sort of leans into this idea of nouns being names of things, but it hits a total wall with everything else. If I show you a picture of someone running, am I showing you the person or am I showing you the act of running? You can't physically isolate the running part and stick a label on it. The action and the person doing it are completely inseparable.
But the problems don't stop with verbs and adjectives. What's really wild is that the theory doesn't even work for a massive category of nouns themselves. If a word's meaning is the thing it points to in the world, what do we do with all the words for things that, well, aren't in the world?
Exactly. We all know what a unicorn is. That word has meaning, but there's nothing in the real world for it to denote. The same goes for abstract nouns, like love or inspiration. You can't point to love, and if you try to get clever and say, oh, well, love is an abstract thing, you've just walked right into a logical trap. The only reason we're calling it a thing is because we have a noun for it. That's a totally circular argument.
Now, this example is a classic, and it's a real killer for the naming theory. For centuries, people used two different expressions, the morning star and the evening star. Now, these two phrases clearly do not have the same meaning. One's about the morning, one's about the evening. Yet, as we now know, they both denote the exact same object, the planet Venus. This proves, without a doubt, that a word's meaning cannot simply be the object it points to.
You know, the naming theory kind of assumes that the world comes to us prepackaged with neat little categories just waiting for us to stick labels on them. But that's just not true. Language imposes categories on the world. Where does a hill end and a mountain begin? The line is completely blurry, and these categories change from culture to culture. The French word fauteuil doesn't map perfectly onto the English armchair. The world isn't pre-sorted for us. Our language does the sorting.
And this, right here, is the final nail in the coffin for that simple words are just labels idea. The philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein pointed out that even the simple act of pointing and naming, what linguists call ostensive definition, is incredibly complex. Think about it. If I point to a chair and say chair, how do you know I mean the whole object and not just the leg or the color or the wood it's made of? You have to already understand the rules and categories of the language just to learn from someone pointing.
So, if meaning isn't a direct link between a word and the world, what's the alternative? Well, a more sophisticated theory came along that suggests the link isn't direct at all. Instead, it's mediated through a concept that exists in our minds. Let's call this one the conceptual theory.
This classic diagram from Ogden and Richards explains the idea perfectly. You've got the word, which they call the symbol, and the actual object in the world, the referent. But, and this is the key, look at that dotted line at the bottom. This theory says there is no direct link between the word and the object. The only connection is by going up through the thought at the top, a mental concept.
Now, this conceptual theory, it seems pretty elegant, right? It solves a lot of the problems we just saw with the naming theory, but it introduces a massive new problem of its own, one that some philosophers call the ghost in the machine problem.
This kind of argument doesn't actually explain anything. It's like saying a car runs because there's an invisible ghost inside pushing the pedals. You've just invented this unobservable thing, the concept, whose only job is to be the meaning. It doesn't actually tell us anything new. It just moves the problem somewhere we can't see it.
So yeah, this theory fails for a few huge reasons. First, it's totally circular. For every word, we just invent a concept that looks exactly like it to be its meaning. Second, these concepts are completely inaccessible. How do we study them? We can't look inside our own minds to see them, let alone anyone else's. And that leads to the third problem: it makes meaning totally subjective. If the meaning of dog is just some private concept in my head, I have no way of ever knowing if it's the same as the concept in your head. Communication itself becomes a complete mystery.
All right, so we've seen two major theories of meaning, basically crash and burn. So where does that leave us? Are we just stuck? Well, no. This is the point where we need to pivot and reframe the entire question we've been asking.
Maybe the whole problem is built into our own language. The verb to have is misleading us. We say a word has meaning, and that little word has makes us go searching for a thing called meaning, either out in the world or inside our heads. But what if meaning isn't a thing a word possesses at all?
And this brings us right back to a huge shift in thinking, again from Wittgenstein. He suggested that we stop searching for what meaning is, and instead we should look at what it does. For a huge number of words, the meaning of a word is simply its use within a language community. Meaning isn't a noun, it's a verb, it's an activity, it's something we do.
So we're going to end not with a neat little answer, but with a new, much more powerful question. If we stop treating words as labels for things or concepts, and instead start seeing them as tools that we use to get things done in the world, how does that change everything we think we know about communication, about thought, and about language itself? Now that's a question worth thinking about.